Okay. Um, I am Oliver Bach, and this is my father, James Bach,
We're in
who
the testmobile.
we're in the testmobile, who I am informed is a tester most of my life. I've had believed he's a tester, and since I've been assured of that, I have hooked up this car with secret cameras, and I have hooked up his shirt with a secret lapel mic so that I can record the conversations that I have with
In
him
the roving
while we're
testmobile.
while we're driving. Yes. So what I wanted to talk about today was the difference between the words testing and checking,
Okay.
and the definitions of those words and why those definitions are important. Before you get into it, I bring this up because today I was scrolling through Reddit as I do, and I saw a meme on our programmer humor of I'll put it up on the screen here so listeners can see. But essentially, it says add tests, implement feature, all tests pass, make changes, run tests, all tests pass. So the idea is to be suspicious of your tests because you're changing things and the tests aren't being tripped. But when I saw this, and I'm not a tester.
And that's because the meme picture has, Fry
Yeah,
from
Fry being
Futurama
suspicious, right?
with
Sure,
his suspicious
right. It's
look.
going to be on the screen.
Yeah.
So the I'm not a tester, but one thing I've picked up from you via osmosis is your position that testing and checking are different things. And as
Yes.
soon as I saw that, I thought, that's not a test, that is a check. Doesn't anybody else see this? And I looked through the comments, and nobody else remarked on that. So
Right.
I I want to talk about that. I want to
Okay.
talk about how you feel about that.
Okay. Well, first, I find the statement generally unobjectionable because I do think tests are different than checks. But if you think of that meme as talking about testing,
Yeah.
it fits.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Even if it's they were talking about checking, but if they were talking about testing, it would still
Right.
be as good a meme as it
Sure.
was before. So I'm not so worried about about that. But most people, of course, will look at it and they'll think what about checks instead of
Yeah.
tests. But so we probably should explain the difference. You want me to explain the difference?
Well, yes, of course I want you to explain the difference. I mean, I know what the difference is, but you are the
You know what the
professional here,
difference
and
is.
I am a layman.
I'd really like to know what you think the difference is.
The difference between a check and a test is a
Yes.
check can be done by without any user input at all. It can be done by a machine. It's just a line of code that says, is this color coming out as red? It comes out as red. It says check passed. A test requires investigation from a person. It requires somebody to look at something and come up with ideas about what's going on. They need to think about, like, will it do this if I do this? What sort of result am I going to produce? That sounds to me like testing rather than
Yeah,
checking.
that's quite good, quite a good description. I'll adjust it a little bit, but that's quite good. And I would say that first of all, the distinction between checking and testing is something that we do in the rapid software testing methodology. In the namespace of that methodology, which is my methodology, it's very important to distinguish between checking and testing. I think my methodology is the best methodology, obviously, but the reason why we make a distinction that most of the rest of the world doesn't think matters is will become apparent shortly. So let's go back to what you said.
Yeah.
So you said it's some code that can function without human interaction.
A check might as well be a mechanical switch.
Yes, a check is an algorithmic process. So it is a mechanical process or a mechanistic process. So it could be that a human who is strictly following instructions and doing absolutely nothing else but following instructions
Right.
can do a check.
Yeah.
If the check engine light on my car comes on right now, that's a check because I don't know what it means. I just know I have to take the car to somebody who knows what it means. So I'm not the tester. I can't be a tester. A test is always a human action. It is always filtered through human judgment and human social competence.
Sure.
So fundamentally, only humans test because testing is a human service done for other humans. So to say that you can write a program that does testing is just like saying, I can write a program that falls in love for me so I don't have to go to the trouble of falling in love.
Yeah, sure.
It's just that dumb.
Yeah.
From my point of view. It's that silly. And, well, why does it matter to make the distinction? It matters to make this distinction because people who don't understand testing hear you talk about a test and you talk about automating it, and now they don't think testing is a skilled activity. Right. They think that a human tester is just someone who pushes buttons. They do not see the skills involved, the judgment involved in designing and interpreting results. Now, what's fascinating to me about that meme is it's got the suspicious eyes, right?
Right.
Well, the code isn't suspicious. Yeah, right. Only humans are suspicious.
It involves testing. The meme involves testing.
The meme actually involves testing, but the people interpreting the meme think that what Fry is doing is outside of testing. Yeah. And what I would say is what Fry is doing is actually completing the test.
Right. So, back to your check engine analogy, if I was to refine my definition of testing more, I would say that the driver who sees the check engine light come up is participating in the check by acknowledging that the light has come up.
Exactly.
But it is the technician who comes to the car who says, okay, the check engine light is on, but why is it on? And that involves testing, investigation.
Yeah, I'm surprised you are that. You must have read some of my stuff online, Oliver.
I have not read anything. I swear, I don't read.
Have you ever read my book?
No, I don't read.
Either of my books?
This is a painful accusation for me.
My own son does not have any idea well, how did you understand the difference between checking and testing then? Where did you find that out?
Because when we are in the car sometimes and you ramble about your job, I do listen to you, actually, sometimes. And that's why I have hooked up these devices to record you, because I think when you say things like that, it is so immensely useful to me as just a life skill. That definition is very important. It's the definition between what is or isn't work, almost. It's like...
So we need a montage here of you at different ages and me wandering through the house muttering about testing. As you look on, wide-eyed. What is wrong with my father?
What does he mean? What do these things mean? I must know. Yeah. So the comments go on with people basically repeating that these are tests. And the first comment chain that interests me, I'll post it up here too, is someone saying, the test itself has error, all tests always pass. And the reply from the original poster, the OP of this meme, said, found this out the hard way. PM, this is failing the user. Me, I have this exact test here and it passes. PM, I assume he's project manager. Try reproducing the bug. Me, yeah, I can reproduce it. Test had a bug. That is testing, the investigation process. But it also shows the flaw of this developer's thinking, where he's thinking things are fine because his check is coming back fine. That security that calling these checks testing creates, I think, is part of why this definition matters.
If you've ever seen a heist movie, you know the difference, because you know that those security guys watching the security cams, someone's going to trick them. They think they see everything with their security cams, but then the hacker plugs in the alternate feed.
Yeah,
and
it's on loop or something.
Or somebody disables the cameras, and the guy's like, I don't know, that camera's always going down, whatever. Or the guy is maybe he's going to be in a boss battle later on. He's the smart, suspicious one, and he says, wait, something's up.
Yeah.
And he investigates. Real security is not just installing cameras. Real security is having the cameras be part of an integrated system of alert people who know what kinds of threats that they're trying to defend from.
So the third comment, or should I say the second comment chain, that interested me, and I'll post it, is this meme is actually closely related to a thing called mutation testing, which is basically the testing of the tests. Now, I think saying testing of the tests is funny and not helpful to say, which is why another reason I think checking is a more useful word than just calling them tests. It's easier to understand what you're trying to talk about. But he goes on to describe what mutation testing is, essentially. And as far as I can tell with my layman eyes, mutation testing is a form of automation which systematically alters the codes in ways to try and trip your checks so that your checks can themselves be tested to show that your check engine light works. It's like trying to screw up the engine to make sure the check engine light comes on. But it is automation. At least in this context, it's automation. How does this fit into a tester's toolkit? How does it not, does it replace a tester?
Mutation testing is not an automated process. It is a process by which you modify the program in various ways to see if the problems that you introduce or the changes that you introduce set off the alarms that you have set. So it's like you set little alarms all around the house, and then you say, well, okay, now I'm going to try to sneak around and see if I can avoid the alarms. And if I can, it means there's something wrong with my alarm system, and I will adjust the alarm system. Now, just like any kind of testing, mutation testing is a process that requires human judgment. Now, there are tools that will automatically insert certain kinds of coding errors that some human has thought of and decided are relevant and decided are likely. And so the people who wrote the code that is being run during this mutation generator exercise, that they are part of the mutation testing. They're not outside the mutation testing. You can't sleepwalk your way through testing, or you shouldn't talk about testing in a way that implies that people can sleepwalk their way.
What do you mean by sleepwalking?
I mean pushing a button, and like literally pushing a button, like the snooze button on your alarm, and then just nodding off, and then while you're asleep, the magical elves do the testing for you and make all the right decisions. You can't do that, not even with AI.
So when you say sleepwalking, what I'm getting from that is the idea that you are developing the product, that you are adding checks to your product, or tests in this case, but you're not actually interacting with the process of testing. You're sleepwalking. You're walking through the world, but you're not interacting with the world. And by adding these tests to your product, but not testing the product.
No, let's talk about sleepwalking a little, because it's that's a pretty rich metaphor. When you're sleepwalking, you are interacting with the world, but you are not interacting the world with awareness of the
Right.
world.
Sure.
You are in fact aware of a different world that's in your mind,
Sure.
and you are mapping that world in your mind onto the real world. And one reason why sleepwalking is dangerous is that that map might not match very well. And you don't have the self awareness and the critical thinking facilities because you're asleep.
So, while you were saying that, I was thinking, well, uh, when you're sleepwalking, you are removed from the ability to understand context of what you're seeing. And from what you've told me, uh, context is very important to testing, and context is something that humans are the best in the world at. So when you were talking earlier about mutation testing with regards to checking, the mutation testing algorithm can't understand the context of what it's doing. It's just making changes, and then things break, and it will whether the checks will go off or on. And it's up to the tester to uh, understand how the context of those things matters. I think a mutation testing algorithm can't replace a tester. It can help a tester because it can speed up some things a tester might be thinking about. And it's a little bit of a segue, but a little bit of a digression. But another thing about testing that I think about all the time, um, checking and testing, that definition is one of them. But the other is focusing and defocusing. And when I hear about a mutation testing tool, I think that's for the defocusing stage where you are blasting changes.
Well, at first you got to explain what focusing and defocusing.
Okay, so I'll give you my definition of focusing and defocusing.
Okay.
As if I was testing a thing and the way I approach solving a problem. Um, the first step is, on seeing the check engine light and not knowing anything about what the engine is to just mess around with stuff, not quite at random, but to pull things, push things, watch what reactions happen, and then maybe pull on those same things again, but do things without a lot of intention. My intention, if there is one, is to try and understand how this puzzle I'm observing fits together. When I think I have an idea formed by the observations I've made, I focus in on that idea. I think, okay, when I pulled this specific thing happened and the light changed. I want to investigate that further. So a mutation testing tool that randomly changes things so that the check light changes can be helpful in illustrating what might be affecting the check light. But
let me go back to focusing and defocusing. So I didn't hear a definition. I'm looking for, like, what does it exactly mean? You kind of gave me an example.
Right. Okay. The definition of focusing and defocusing,
yeah,
I would say, is...
How are those different?
Yes. Defocusing is the broadening of your scope in approaching a problem. Focusing is the narrowing of your scope in approaching a problem.
That is one kind of focusing and defocusing, I guess you could say.
Okay.
So,
well, tell me what you think.
Focusing is any thought process which is bound to a specific model or process and is guided by that model or process. That is focusing. In other words, I have a thought, and my thoughts have a certain focus. I'm thinking about this thing instead of that thing.
Yeah.
We always have some kind of focus in our thoughts. Even in the example that you gave where you said, I'm just testing and looking at different things, you're still focused on testing. You've decided you're going to test. So, so it's all relative. We could be hyper focused, we could be somewhat focused, But whatever it is that is guiding or mediating your thoughts, that's a focus.
Sure.
Now, defocusing just means change that. Change that to a different focus. You can't give up all kinds of focus. I mean, that just turns you into a white noise perceiver. You wouldn't be able to see anything or understand anything. We can't do that with our minds to be completely unfocused. But we certainly can let go of one focus or shift a focus from one thing to another thing. We can go from one activity to another.
Yeah.
So what you described in your example is an example of focusing and defocusing in the sense that you began with a soft focus,
Right.
looking around at different things, and then something piques your interest,
Right.
and you decide, now I'm going to increase my focus on that thing. And I'm going to look very carefully and meticulously at it. And I am going to change one thing at a time and be careful to track what I've changed and what I've done. And then to defocus again means to shake that off and say, okay, now I'm going to do something else, or I'm going to look at the big picture again. So when you say that mutation testing is a kind of defocusing, you're right. It is a kind of defocusing. And it's a correct use of that idea, because what the checks have done is the checks have focused you. Every check looks at a particular thing and says, is this what it's supposed to be? I'm looking for this title on this screen. I'm looking for this button right here, and it's got to be the right color. It's got to have the right title, something like that. And I'm going to see that. And if that is the way I expect it to be, then the product is probably okay.
Yeah.
That's the assumption behind checking. If I do all my checks, then the product is probably okay, which is a similar idea to the security guard saying, if there's no bad guys on my video cameras here, my surveillance cameras, I guess no crimes are being committed right now. So what mutation testing is trying to do is defocus the test design process. You were thinking about those checks, the process of designing those checks. You were thinking a certain way, you were looking for certain things, and by now changing the product in different ways, so you uncover blind spots in the process of designing those checks.
I agree. But so I had this idea while we were talking about mutation testing, and that is that mutation testing can be an algorithmic thing that is done by a machine, but mutation testing can also be done by a person without machines at all.
Yeah.
But it's completely different. It is a completely different thing.
What you would do to do mutation testing by a human is you might run, maybe you have some automated checks. Maybe they're not automated, but let's pretend they're automated. So you have some automated checks going on, and you intentionally cause a failure. You force quit the application, or you make the disk drive fill up, or you take the internet offline. You do something that will mess things up, and then you're hoping to see that the checks go, whoa, something's wrong here.
Well, yes, but what I mean specifically is that mutation testing without the algorithm automatically, what I'm saying is that the algorithm can make changes in the code, but it cannot understand the context of those changes except that it's coded to make those changes. Yeah. Humans understand the context of those changes, but also we are inescapable from the context that surrounds us. We know the context of the product, most likely. We understand the context of our social connections with other people, how computers are used, most likely, right? So we're thinking, when we do mutation testing as a person with automated assistance or without, we're making changes that we think probably are likely to cause a failure, rather than randomly this might cause a failure.
Likely to cause a failure, and also, if it were to cause a failure, it would be a bad failure.
It would be a bad failure. That's another thing. The mutation testing that a human is capable of has an inherent understanding of value for the changes being caused. So when a machine is doing it, I think it does not understand the consequences of a change like that, or how easy the change is to make for a user, for example. Um, if you were testing an engine and you like pulled out a piston and the engine exploded, or you jammed the piston and the engine exploded, um, you could say, yeah, that's a pretty bad failure. But the machine has no context for that. It's just saying, the engine running check ended, and the engine is presently on fire and blown into pieces.
A client that I had recently had posted to me about their 40,000 checks.
Wow, 40,000.
They showed me their 40,000 checks. Yeah, and yeah, it was impressive. So I was doing uh, testing, and I created automation that was it's called end-to-end automation. So I ran the whole thing with GUI level automation that went through the entire process of a user using this thing. And I caught a big problem with the logic, the business rule logic of this thing. And this is a product that's supposed to diagnose illnesses in people, and it was diagnosing the wrong illnesses. That's a pretty serious problem.
Wait, but you said they had 40,000 checks.
40,000
How did they not catch this before, though?
Here's how. They were running the checks, but the checks were pointed at the wrong thing. So it's like, imagine you have a robot that checks that all of your windows in your building are not broken. There's no broken windows in your building. And you run it and it reports everything's fine, sir. And then you find out later it was checking the building across the street,
yeah,
which had no broken windows. And you just assumed that it was checking your building, but it wasn't. That's basically what was happening is they had several versions of the diagnostic logic, and they had left it pointed at the wrong version, not the one that we were shipping.
So
they were serenely confident.
Okay, so what I'm understanding here is that all we have to do to replace testers is make sure our checks are pointed at the same product. And okay, boom, we don't need testers anymore. You just said the checks worked.
Here's the problem with that. And it's the same problem you have with mutation testing. You can think up a bunch of different mutations, and then you try out all the mutations. You change the code in the different ways, and you say, look, my checks spot every single mutation. No matter what mutation I try, I can't fool these checks. The problem is the mutation you haven't thought of.
Yeah.
There's no algorithm for thinking of all the ways things can go wrong. And that's why we need humans to stay in the loop and to be responsible. Humans have to remain responsible for their work.
They have to remain engaged with the work.
They need to remain engaged with the work. If not, then we have irresponsible engineering. That's what it is. And of course, there is a lot of irresponsible engineering in the world. And
sure, I mean, we just talked about CrowdStrike before.
Yes.
And that's an example of a check gone awry.
Yes. A constant theme talking with me is I'll bring up the theme of responsibility. The thing is you can get really rich in this world by being irresponsible. Very few people go to jail for irresponsible engineering. But I'm just uninterested in working with people that are irresponsible. I'm a consultant and a tester who's interested in working with companies that want to be good at what they do instead of shrugging and dumping their crap on people, which is the kind of thing that companies like Google do, and Facebook, and even Apple Computer does that. In fact, I was at Apple Computer. I worked at Apple Computer. And one of the reasons I left Apple Computer is I couldn't get them interested in really good testing. This was way back in 1991. They weren't interested because they were too rich. They just said, well, everything Apple touches turns to gold, so we don't really care.
Yeah.
And that's very depressing for a tester.
Yeah. So one thing I want to close this out. When I think about the definition between testing and checking, I think that the definition is critical because calling checking testing, calling those tests gives the impression to management that your product is tested. You have, and I don't even want to say that management is dumb or anything for thinking this, because it's right there in the word. You have done the tests, therefore product tested. It
Yeah.
follows logically.
Yeah.
But it is not, in fact, testing. And all the people in this comment thread, these developers, know that. They all know that. They're all replying like, yeah, you got to test your tests. But saying test your tests is confusing. It doesn't really make sense on its face.
It is, and yes, it doesn't make sense. The reason why they do it is because in their minds, it doesn't really make that much of a difference.
It doesn't make a difference. That's what they want to say.
They're still able to do pretty good testing, even though they're talking about it in this loosey-goosey way.
But I think they're able to do that in spite of the confusion of this definition. And if you were to invite this confusing definition into the automation of a product claiming to replace testers, you would get very bad testing because the base assumptions of the product being created are wrong. That these checks are not enough. That the interpretation of the developer viewing them is critical in determining what is actually happening and what the problem is, or if there even is a problem. So it always annoys me. It always annoys me seeing that, and I feel very strongly about it as a person who's not a tester.
Yeah, but just remember, to some degree, I'm just like someone who's a dancing expert complaining about bad dancing.
Sure.
You know that Australian breakdancing lady, Raygun?
Yeah.
Who did all this terrible breakdancing?
Yeah.
I watched a video of her breakdance afterwards, or maybe it was a video from before. And when she's not in a competition context, you just see her like dancing on the street. You actually go, oh, that's pretty good dancing.
Yeah.
It's only when you see her next to the Olympic dancers that you go, my God, she's not as good as them.
Yeah.
But she's way better than me.
Sure.
And you wouldn't just look at her normally if you saw her out of a competition context and just say, that's a bad dancer. You'd say, well, for just someone off the street, that's pretty good breakdancing moves, for a mom.
Yeah.
It's what she looks like. And so I'm interested in testing at a very high level. I want to be on the Olympic testing team. If there ever was an Olympic testing event, I would want to be on the Olympic testing team. So I complain about things that for people who don't want to do a very high level of work, they just want to do something that gets them by. They roll their eyes when they hear me talk about testing. Yeah, I'm a competition shooter.
Yeah,
I'm not just plinking tin cans. So I need to be very precise,
right.
And I need to understand what I'm talking about at all times.
Well, one of the reasons that I want to do these videos with you, and why I was inspired to do these videos with you, is because I have known you to always be someone who's very interested in being precise. Definitions really matter. What you're doing matters. Whenever I try to say this is what I'm doing, you invite me to question further about what do I really think about what I'm doing?
Yeah.
How would I
I
put it
got
into
that
words?
from your granddad. That comes
Yeah,
from
Richard.
my father.
I know. I got a little bit of that from him too, because he did the same thing to me.
Yeah.
And uh, in our current world, I find that people are okay being vague. They're okay with inaccuracy. They're okay with things that are approximate as long as they feel good enough. And that is fine until you are CrowdStrike.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I think
sometimes it really matters to get things right.
So I think there's a lot of value in this discussion, and I hope people watching got some value out of listening to you ramble, because I always get value out of it. I love listening to you ramble. Thanks, Dad. Thanks for talking today about testing.
All right, good. Thanks.
Okay, there we go. That's it.
Right, well done.
We
got
some clips.
There's some real editing that has to happen.
Yeah, 41 minutes. I'll take it. I'll take the file. You got to send that recording.